Thursday webinar series on World Bank's data-driven and digital agriculture, what's cooking. And in this series, we invite innovators, startups, thought leaders, industry leaders, researchers, and World Bank's staff who are transforming agriculture and food systems using data-driven digital agriculture. My name is Parmesh Shah. I am the global lead for data-driven digital agriculture at the Agriculture and Food Practice at the World Bank. And this webinar series is also being jointly hosted with the World Bank's Open Learning Campus. And all this seminar presentations and recordings, as well as the earlier ones, are available on the World Bank's Open Learning Campus website, which we will give you a link in the chat box soon. But you will also find that at the end of the announcement of the webinar as well. Today's webinar is very interesting in the context in which we are. Clearly, we have seen quite a significant growth of startups in the EdTech sector. And so EdTech sector has been late in terms of embracing digital and data-driven approaches. You know about FinTech and EdTech are fairly ahead in terms of the growth pattern and the innovation cycle. We just finished a report in Africa region on scalable disruptive agriculture technology startups. We found that there were at least 470 which were scalable in Africa, and out of them 170 were the one which had the highest potential of scaling up. So the World Bank wants to work with startups all over the world, especially post-COVID. We have found that there is proliferation of startups which are innovating very rapidly because of the supply chain food systems being disrupted. Today, we have a very interesting topic, failing tech, scaling tech, the journey from idea to scaling up. So often small things lead to big ideas failing. So I think this is a realization which has come, and fast rollouts, quick scale-ups. And so a lot of challenges of implementing innovative solutions are lost there. We have a very interesting panel today. We have Chris, and please apologize if I mispronounce some names because, it's quite we have a very interesting set of surnames here from all parts of the world. And if I mispronounce someone, I would apologize to you. Chris Weigl and Mariella Goebl are the founders, presenters today. They are the co-founders of SeeHow, a startup tackling transparency in global supply chains. And they are currently innovation experts for TechnoServe in West Africa. And they will also give us an entrepreneurial perspective on why many big ideas fail, including their startups and how small-scale testing, measuring, and learning is key to scaling up solutions. They will also provide hands-on insights into their work with Nespresso's coffee supply chain, building a chatbot for Beninese farmer education, and using drone data to improve market access for smallholder cashew farmers. It's very, very interesting and varied use cases. They will also be joined by our panelists as discussants, Mark Schultz, and this is the one I cannot pronounce. The Dutch names are very difficult for me. Senior Innovation and Scaling Scientist at CGIAR, and he also works with Wageningen as well. And we have also Nazar Sirotyuk. He works with Nestle, but he has had a very interesting career with private sector and large organizations. And we'll talk about how corporate sector embraces or doesn't embrace innovation. And we have our own Mary Agnes, who is an agriculture economist with our data-driven team, and who will also talk about how the World Bank can leverage both innovation through private and public sector and what should be done there. You have all the bios attached with the webinar, and but I'll briefly introduce to do justice to the vast experience we have. Chris is has worked on innovating for responsible sourcing and fair value chains. He has worked on environmental technology. He has a degree there. He joined UNIDO and OECD to work on these innovations. He also, as I said, co-founded an image analysis startup focusing on bringing insights into on-ground agriculture through mobile phones. And he now works for TechnoServe in Benin, where he leads a project on remote sensing on agriculture practices in cashew. Mariella is an environmental economist at TechnoServe, which is a globally active and international NGO with whom we also work in many other countries. She leads the processor-focused tech innovation activities for cashew sector in Benin. Before joining TechnoServe, Mariella had founded a startup on remote image analysis for agriculture practices and also worked with the competitive intelligence team of Nestle. She's also involved in sustainable forestry and also teaches business cases on sustainability at Bessel. Mark is a senior innovation and scaling scientist with CGIR, our sister institution, and Wageningen University. He's based in Rwanda, and he produced the flagship Improved Livelihoods at Scale with the CGI research program on roots, tubers, and bananas that has activities in 80 countries. He directs a CGI team of 30 staff in Rwanda as principal investigator of various programs that focus on innovation and scaling up for improving food income. And he's also the founder of Scaling Readiness, an approach that supports design, implementation, and monitoring of strategies for scaling innovations. Nazar is an experienced innovation manager with more than 10 years of engagement in leading FMCG companies, including Nestle, Bersthoff, L'Oreal, and he has extensive experience in business innovation management and has led teams and launched businesses in specific geographies and accelerated innovations across geographies. Currently, his work is focused on mid to long-term horizons with strong focus on emerging technologies. Last but not the least, we have Marie-Agnes, who is an economist with Agriculture Food Global Practices. She focuses on data-driven digital agriculture and particularly how digital technologies and innovations can support transformation of food systems. And prior to joining the World Bank, Marie-Agnes worked at OECD, and she developed a lot of policy analysis on various dimensions of digital technologies in global value chains. She also worked for ODI and other international organizations on barriers to trade. And she has a PhD in environmental economics from Sciences Po Paris. And so that's about our illustrious panel. Some ground rules today. I would sort of just like to tell you that after the presentations and discussans, we will have a free-flowing discussion between the panelists and the discussants, which Marie-Agnes will moderate. And then I will open it up for questions from the audience. But please start asking your questions in the chat box the moment you will get an idea or you want to ask something, because we will not have a conventional Q&A session today. We will harvest the questions from the chat, and then we will pose them to the panelists and the discussants. So I would urge you to start asking questions as soon as presentations are going on or as soon as they end, so that we can harvest a rich set of questions from you. And we promise you that we will incorporate a lot of your questions into the final session of the webinar. All the presentation and recordings from this webinar will be sent to all the people who have registered and will be also available at the OLC website. So without further ado, I will now request Mariella and Chris to make their introductory presentation. Over to you, Mariella and Chris. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Parmesh. I hope everybody can hear me, and I hope my presentation slide is also still up there. It's really a pleasure to be here and to present to you And I'm particularly looking forward to the panel discussion afterwards. So I think the reason why we're here today is, for Mariella and I to present you a little bit an insight into our work and tell you why we think that failing is actually really important to scale digital technologies. And we want to do that by presenting to you a few examples of our own work as entrepreneurs with our startup SeeHow, and as well as with our work for TechnoServe in Benin. And I think, the word failing, of course, is always a bit doomed, but on the left-hand side here on the slide that I'm showing you is actually a quite beautiful picture from a cashew farm in Benin, taken by one of our drones that we use with the project with TechnoServe. And I think that's, it shows me and it motivates me to push for these kind of innovations, because we are getting there, right? But still, we need to learn how to adapt technologies to the use cases that we're working in. A little bit about the agenda for our presentation, which we tried to keep quite short. We'll first talk you through the build, measure, learn approach, which is one of many approaches how you can actually go about scaling innovation or scaling technologies. There are loads of these approaches and concepts out there, but in fact, the build, measure, learn approach has been really useful for us, and that's why we want to share it. After that, we'll go through some examples, as I said, from our own work, and finish up and open up to the panel discussion with a few learnings and recommendations from our side on how we think that international organizations can support innovation.
So also from my side, I hope you can hear me well. Let's at the beginning put ourselves into the shoes of a project manager. A project manager at a public institution or an NGO. And what we usually do is, and that might look familiar to you, is to take a very linear approach to project management. So we spend most of our time on planning and building the solution, and only at the end of the project timeline, we get to user testing. And that's a very good approach for familiar environments, where you work with well-known user groups, as well as well-established technologies or processes. Most often, however, and that's particularly when you're implementing technological innovation, you don't find yourself in such an environment. Much more likely is an environment that would benefit from flexibility in adapting the solution to user needs. Because if not, you risk sinking lots of money and time into a solution, which at the end you may find to fail user needs, but then you're actually ready to employ it and it doesn't really fit. So let's flip that approach. The build, measure, learn approach, which Chris has already mentioned at the beginning, is a good approach for such uncertain environments of tech innovation. It allows for rapid test cycles, and you have early iterative user feedback. And in fact, the idea is, and now I invite you to look at the illustration in the middle of the slide, the idea is to build a first very basic solution, which is also often called an MVP, or a minimum viable product. And then you get that MVP quickly into the hands of some test users. And then you observe how they interact with your solution, you document and measure these observations such that you can take away learnings, and these learnings inform your next iteration on building the solution further, or even abandoning the MVP in favor of another, much better MVP, which you then get into another testing cycle. And I think at the center of this approach, and that's really the key message here, is that we need to look at failure as experiments rather than the negative connotation of failure. And these experiments we look at them as necessary for the development of a successful solution. And now to contextualize this, we're going to walk you through 3 examples, as Chris has mentioned, and these come from various tech innovation projects that we've been involved in.
So the first example we want to give is really our own startup experience. And that was really our own first experiment. And it was a startup called SeeHow that Mariella and I founded together. And it actually tried to leverage the presence of mobile phones in many developing countries to actually help bring transparency to global supply chains. And we actually wanted to use cameras and other sensors on the mobile phone to allow companies like Nespresso or H&M to collect data from the field. So for instance, a coffee farmer with a mobile phone could take a picture of their plants, and in the headquarters, through our technology, Nespresso would get an idea about the quality of the coffee that this farmer is harvesting. So basically, we got really good feedback. We raised some money to actually build out our technology, which you can see on the right-hand side, a screenshot of analyzing coffee quality. We got great exposure to companies and pitched to these companies. But to be honest, we really kind of went this linear approach and failed to think about incentives for the users in the field of why they should be actually using and contributing to our technology. And so in the end, we burned through our money and our cash without actually really thinking about the user cycle. Moving on from that kind of first example, we are now working for TechnoServe on a couple of innovation projects in Benin. And the next example is really a step ahead of SeeHow already. So it's called Cashew Labs, where we're actually trying to leverage satellite and drone technology to analyze cashew plantations. And here we're right in the middle of this learning and measuring process, because a lot of these technologies are actually built for large scale plantations, but not for smallholder environments. So you often end up with situations like you can see on the left-hand side. Of course, mobility is a big issue of moving your drone from one plantation to the next plantation and capturing smallholder farms with your drone technology. But here it's really about testing out different technologies, walking through these test cycles and trying to adapt the existing technologies to smallholder farming environments.
The third example, and it's actually the last one already, is the Benin cashew chatbot, which we're currently working on with TechnoServe. So for anyone who does not know what a chatbot is a computer program to which you can send messages and it will reply as if it were a human. So you'll find yourself chatting forth and back with a computer program, and you may not even realize that you're actually conversing with a robot. And the goal here in this setting is to use this technology and train farmer extension workers on best agricultural practices in order to increase the outreach of our training. And the illustration you see visualizes the build, measure, learn cycles we went through. So after profiling the user group, we quickly built that MVP, that very basic chatbot, because we wanted to put it into the hands of a few test users early to really analyze how they would interact with the program, with the chatbot at all. And that was after 2 weeks already. So we didn't spend much time into that first MVP. And so the second MVP, and now I'm moving to the century cycle, was already adapted because we learned that Facebook was not the channel that was familiar to the users. So the second cycle was already on the popular or the channel that was familiar for the users. However, we didn't spend time on building a solution for WhatsApp. Instead, we used a pretender type, and that actually meant that I spent a week in front of my computer responding to the messages coming from the users, acting like a chatbot. So I was actually the chatbot, and the idea here was to really understand how the users would message, to document these learnings, and then we could iterate further and refine our solution. And with this iterative approach, we moved further and now have a functional chatbot, which is about to be launched. So, and the point I want to make here is that compared to the SeeHow example that Chris talked us through, I think we were able to use the pretender type to make sure already early on that the solution would actually serve users' needs.
And so to sum up our presentation and to wrap it up, I think the three recommendations or learnings that we took from our projects are quite simple for international institutions and governments to support innovation on the track to scale. So first of all, of course, governments and international institutions can build a competitive telecommunications sector, but they also have to be open for innovators to kind of influence policy and give advice on policy. The second one is more on governments trying to attract tech companies by revealing missed market opportunities. So to show that, you know, a problem they want to solve is actually a market opportunity for tech companies. And last but not least, the rather painful one is that donors who fund innovation have to get used to failure of projects, or rather they have to fund these test and iterative cycles to really enhance learning of how you actually scale a technology. And with that, I think we're at the end of our presentation, and I'm really looking forward to the panel where we can also answer a bit more in depth some question about our projects and discuss with the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris and Mariella. It's very interesting presentation. We have never had such a brief presentation by any presenter till now, so I want to congratulate you for that. Because everyone is more interested in the specific solution, and especially our people are interested in the specific solution. But I think this is a new dimension. You are explaining which aspect of, how do we invest in these kinds of innovations. And please keep on looking in the chat box for questions which are coming. They may be specific to your presentation. So that you weave those answers when you are answering as part of the panel discussion, you should weave those answers to those questions in what your response. Okay, I'll now move to Mark. And Mark, your perspectives, please, based on your rich experience. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Parmesh, and also Christoph and Mariella for the very good presentation. I think my feedback will mainly come from academic or applied research for development sector in which I'm active, where we are engaged in conducting research, of course, with the ultimate objective that many people will use our products or our tools. And in that process, we run into similar problems as Christoph and Mariella have explained. So I'm very happy to be able to share some of the findings from our programs and projects with you as well. I think I want to make 4 main points, actually. And the fourth one is that failure is actually not promoted in our sector. I think from each 100 new ideas, at least 90 should fail. But it seems that we are not really encouraged to report on failure. And because we don't report on failure, we also don't learn from failure. We recently had a special issue on the science of scaling in one of the Elsevier journals called Agricultural Systems. I can share the link with you if you want. And we had explicitly asked people to submit papers that were describing well-intended innovation and scaling processes, but ultimately not working out in the way people were expecting. And our objective was to harvest some of those lessons learned and make them available for the broader community. And out of the 25 submissions, we only had one paper or one author group that was bold enough to put failure on paper. Unfortunately, that one also got published. So I think this is the first point that I want to make. It seems like there's a structural error in the system of research for development where failure is not promoted, or the reporting on failure is not promoted. My second point is a little bit related to that, and I think I want to quote one of my colleagues who often says, "Pilot projects never fail, pilot projects never scale." And it really has to do with the controlled environment in which many of the pilot projects that we work on are taking place. And with a controlled environment, I mean that it's a little bit like a bubble where we can control many of the things that we cannot control in the real world. So as a result, also many of the technologies or innovations that we develop in such bubbles, they will not survive once they get exposed to the market pressure or to the political pressure in the real world. Examples of such a controlled environment are maybe that you're paying your farmers to attend the training, that you have a very typical project setup that Mariella and Christoph also said, that you work according to your log frame. You have to report to your donor on certain issues. Once you find out that something does not work, are you able to change the focus or the objective of your proposal, of your project? In many cases, that is not feasible. So the third point I want to make has a little bit to do with the learning cycles that Christoph and Mariella explained, and technology development, testing, validation processes. They don't really engage the next user and the end user early on in the process. I think in many cases we are so obsessed with developing a technology. And then all of a sudden, once you start testing it with your end users, you find out that they have very different demands, they have very different needs. They may not understand certain features in your product, or you may not understand certain features in your product. So I think that is a very important point of agile development. Engage, be inclusive, be open, for your users to participate in such a tech design and testing process very early onwards. So the last point I want to make for now is about scaling. And I think there's a lot of confusion, and the word is being increasingly used in I think all of our vocabularies and organizations, but it's still a little bit of a black box. And what I want to say there is that we really need to go beyond what I call copy-paste approaches, where we see something working in one location or in one country. There's a new opportunity to get funding, and we say like, wow, this worked in Nigeria. It will probably also work in Rwanda. It will also work in Ethiopia, maybe even in Asia, Latin America, and etc. And I think we really need to start thinking about technologies as part of packages. Technologies alone do not scale. They scale as part of a package that does not only have the technological innovation, but it also has the policy innovation. It also has the mindset innovation, or needs the mindset innovation. That needs partnership innovation, that it needs innovations in finance, that needs innovations in markets. And if any of those things is missing in your package, then your technology will not be contributing to societal outcomes at scale. So I think this is a very important idea of that we also promote as part of the scaling readiness approach that Ramesh was also referring to, is that Technology scale as part of packages, and these kinds of packages, they need to be locally adapted. So they are different from one situation to the other. And I think the corporate or the private sector, they understand these things much better than the public agricultural research and development sector. Maybe just the last point, there is an evolving community of practice of people that are thinking and trying to unpack the black box, or to open up the black box of scaling of innovation. This community of practice, the global community of practice on scaling, I've seen a couple of the members also attending this webinar. Julie Howard, I've seen online. Maybe Johannes Lin has also joined us. And this is a group of people that try to bring together scaling experience, so science and practice from different kinds of sectors, such as the health sector, the education sector, the energy sector, the agricultural sector, and etc. So I think that is also, it could also be an interesting platform for some of you on this webinar to maybe contribute and to share some of your experiences with innovation and scaling in the agricultural sector. Let me stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mark. A very interesting perspective. And please share the link about the scaling up program. And warm welcome to Julie Howard also. We have collaborated with her in the past as well. So I think the dimensions you brought are very important. I think replicability and scaling up are very overrated kind of words. And I think what you brought out is the localization and customization, which I think the private sector always customizes, does test market. It's always been part of the innovation cycle. But how do we incorporate those kinds of thinking into public sector when it promotes innovation is a very big issue. And I hope the discussants talk a little bit about that when we talk about it. Now, let me ask now Nazar to join and bring the corporate perspective from his various experiences. Nazar, over to you.
Parmesh, thank you very much. Look, I'll try to bring my personal perspective, obviously from the corporate sector I've been in. And I think, as we all said today, innovation is a difficult or a strange beast. 90% of innovation fail, and there is no one formula of success. And for me personally, I would say, you know, to have a proper innovation, what it takes is right, passionate people in the right context, in the right period of time. And the same successful people in one startup or in one initiative, they might have another 9 failures. So it's not only about people, it's the context, and, you know, the need plays an important role. To build on what Mark said, obviously in global innovations or in significant innovation, there are too many stakeholders, or let's say just many pieces that need to work together like a complex mechanism in a Swiss watch. And therefore, it's very important to align around the direction we're going and why also this direction important. So if I have to talk about my personal experience and why innovations fail, I think very often, and echoing what people said today already on that call, is that we're not necessarily addressing the right needs, and not always. Sometimes it just comes, oh, I have this idea, let me work on that. And I have not yet checked if anybody truly needs it. Now, what's also important to say that some issues or some ideas are really solving exact needs, but we seldomly think, where do those needs sit on the hierarchy of needs? And I give you one example, you know, there might be a pain point of the transport not being on time. However, how big is this pain point in the life of people? That's another question that is not often asked. And is it the right tension or the right issue to focus on for corporate or private sector? That's another good question to debate. So I would say, before running, it's very important to have a strategic kind of thinking and approach to say, okay, where are we going and why? And have this dialogue between different parties involved. The second element, because we're talking about tech, even in agriculture or elsewhere, is that there is certain generational gap. The tech advancements have been accelerating significantly in the last 10 to 15 years. And very often that goes in contradiction with the experience of people who are now in political or business power, most of them very likely to be 55 years and older. And I don't want to offend these people, but just the reality is that the environment they were growing in was not full of internet, was not full of drones, AI, etc. And therefore, there is just this basic awareness gap, and we need to somehow try to close it, be it in your sector or in, in the environment I'm in, really taking those people by the hand who have the decision power and the control of budgets and explaining them how does it work, and maybe making them navigating a drone, maybe showing them, making them experiencing a chatbot. I think that's a second very important element to build this basic awareness or to close the awareness gap. The third element I've personally been experienced is, okay, you did all this great job on awareness building, but then there is a knowing doing gap. Because if somebody has just discovered something, and especially we're talking about people in control, it might not yet become the top item on their agenda list. So it's very important to make them accept that we need to test and learn everything that was saying, lots of experiments, accepting that 90% would fail, explaining to them what are the right KPIs to track it. But most of all, we need to explain why they need to back it up. Why is it so important for them to support innovation in whatever sector each of us is working in? Then I would say the other important reason, and we've been talking about here, this here today, is the end-to-end ownership. In many organizations I've been exposed to, or my colleagues, my friends working for, we see that it's very likely that one team starts one piece of work and then it hands over to another team, and then the third, the fourth, the fifth team is involved. And here you already have kind of lost in translation effect. So making sure you have right people doing it end to end, or at least few people covering the whole idea to scaling process, is very, very important. And I see it as a major, limitation factor in many places. And finally, going back once more to people and context, because the change is all around us and it's so fast, how do we make sure we are closing the capability gap that is emerging just because of speed of change? How do we make sure that learning is a constant part of our everyday journey, and that those teams working on innovation are constantly upskilled and trained on whatever is important? So I would say I would like also to leave as much time for Q&As as possible. Therefore, the key messages in my sense would be the challenge of big corporations, NGOs, innovators group is focusing on the truly big and right things, instead of dispersing our attention. Second is getting right people with the right level of resources working on that. And as we said, accepting failure, and it's okay, we iterate and pitch, and the end outcome can be very different from the initial idea, and that's perfectly fine. And also maybe supporting these innovation teams longer in the journey. If I take a kind of a small child, today what I see, the child is born by one mom and then handed over to another mom to be breastfed for the first 3 months, and then handed over to another mom. And this is where, there is no continuity. So I would say whoever is supporting the innovators group, it's very important to support it longer in the journey, so that we're letting our child go in life when it's well equipped or equipped enough to travel on his or her own. And yeah, I would say from my side, as I say, right people and the right context are very important, and therefore happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nazar. Very, very interesting perspective. End-to-end support to innovation ecosystems, long-term support required, need for huge amount of awareness and literacy among the 55 plus decision makers who are at the driver's seat in terms of deciding, but don't know the intricacies of a lot of digital technologies. Very, very important points. I would like you in the discussion to also reflect on your own experience in Nestle, because people want to listen to that as well. Of one example from Nestle's, cohort, which I think we should learn from. So keep that in mind when we are having the discussions at that stage in the next round. But very, very important perspectives. Mary Agnes, over to you. And then please go ahead and facilitate the discussion, the first round, based on the issues raised by all the panelists till now, and also bring in the World Bank's perspective here. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Parmesh, and thank you all already for a really very insightful discussion, I think. And so I will try to bring forward a few points, maybe more from the World Bank side, before moving on to, as Parmesh said, a conversation between panelists, as I'm sure they would be welcome to have the opportunity to develop further some of the ideas that were brought here. So from the World Bank, as the World Bank, we've been using digital technologies in our project for quite some time, but let's say it was more in an ad hoc fashion. I mean, some very successful one, but still a bit ad hoc. And we're currently trying to figure out how to mainstream digital technologies in our projects and what could be the role for the World Bank and more generally in supporting global public good in this area. And as we have heard today, there are a lot of ideas out there that seem rather straightforward at first, but implementation is never easy as it sounds, and there are quite a few elements to check before embarking on these types of projects. So in the conversation, some of the issues that I hear are that because there might not always be enough understanding about local conditions, or because there is not that element that allows to scale successful ideas, there's been all this hype on digital technologies, but we're arriving at this point of reality check with a broader understanding from the ag-food community that I'm part of, which are not necessarily used to the startup world, that if we want to use digital technologies to solve our problems, we might need to change our ways of innovating and operating even more than we think. So I would like to bring forward a few elements that we can take from this discussion and from different experiences at the bank. The first is clearly the need for background checks, which now includes not only analog, but also digital value chains and infrastructure. And one of these elements, which I refer to usually as the data infrastructure, which includes the physical, which is, the devices, just having access to a phone, as well as the regulatory environment that has been mentioned in the discussion that allows data to flow from and to different stakeholders and back to farmers, actually. And as Chris and Mariella mentioned, connectivity is very important and a competitive telecommunication service is important. And I hope they might be able to come back on the case on Benin, which I know we talked about, and I think that was an issue that they were confronted to. And so, yes, of course, it's important to have this telecommunication sector and a competitive one, but that's not all. In a world of using big data and data-driven decision-making, data needs to be brought together, aggregated from different sources, needs to be stored, which brings a lot of issues of data governance, market access for a range of services, which actually might not be provided from, have to be provided from abroad, and so need access to the data flow between countries. So a lot of regulatory issues out there. On the connectivity side, by the way, just to mention one element, connectivity takes time, and sometimes we should be careful about something which could be a bit counterproductive in the short run, which is that a few well-connected rural areas in some of the countries we work with, and sometimes there's a bit of over-testing in these areas for some services, and we increasingly hear about some form of farmers' fatigue with constant solicitation of testing of services, requests of data, and sometimes disillusion with some of the digital services not delivering, or maybe not delivering enough according to promises. So this is why I think the discussion on customization is often coming. And this relates to the point made by Mark about localization, I feel. And I guess a broader access to data for such customization is indeed needed, which means that we have to ask farmers. But it's still an important element missing for a lot of the newcomers in the market. So maybe we have to think and find ways to better share this, last mile data that has been collected, and maybe reusing it a bit better between private sector companies too. So maybe some things to think about here. One other element of the background check, I think, is the identification of stakeholders in the value chain and key stakeholders, which are sometimes missing for the adoption of digital technologies. Good knowledge of value chain has always been important to target projects, but in the digital space, this might be even more important, particularly as in the digital space, innovation in the value chain is everywhere in the value chain. So not only at the farmer level and trickles down to the rest of the value chain, it can happen anywhere. So in the 1 Million Farmer project in Kenya, which is supporting the development of digital technologies in the agriculture sector based on the development of a platform for farmers and supporting innovators through innovation challenges, the key structure seems to have been Farmers Association. And so a good understanding of the value chain and using tools such as innovation platforms to get value chain stakeholders buy-in also seems key. But more broadly, with digital, there are some new actors in the value chain, and innovators might not always be well connected to the agri-food sector. And I think Chris and Mariella touched upon this. And so reiterating their points, I think we do believe that there's a role for governments to invest in these institutional innovations, to link use cases to these technology providers, and as they mentioned, revealing mixed market opportunities, attract technology players to their countries. And we are currently thinking about ways in which the World Bank could have a role in supporting the development of such innovative institutions. And also coming back to the localization, these innovative institutions can allow some form of co-creation, which I think is a bit of a buzzword in this environment, but co-creation between value chain stakeholders, which is, I think, an important tool for localizing and identifying the needs, as was mentioned during different presentations. But also, I think, to allow stakeholders to prepare for change. Digital technologies can create deep business disruptions, which can also create some forms of bottlenecks for adoption, because if there's a lack of buying by the key stakeholders, which being smaller threatened, then we might not have any adoption by the other actors. And so my last point, I think, is beyond these important background elements, how can we actually create this agile environment that is needed in the digital space from our point of view? How an institution like the World Bank can adapt to this innovative world of fail to scale, and where the original idea might be very far from the results. And so what should we change in our ways of doing things to adapt to that world of complex text testing? And do we also actually have to change our own business model? Or maybe rather, how can we help developing such environments that would support innovation, their localization, adoption, and scaling up? Is our role maybe to increasingly be a convener, maybe through the creation of a global innovation hub, which we're actually thinking about, or to create a community of stakeholders globally to support local development of agri-food digital ecosystem, or creating channels for sharing knowledge and experience to ultimately support building experience in agri-food tech sector and for scaling technologies. So on that note, I would like to move to a conversation with the panelists before we go to Q&A. And first wanted maybe to allow Chris and Mariella to reflect a little bit on what the discussants have already shared, and maybe develop a little bit on some of their experiences, maybe on the Benin case, on the telecommunications sector, and maybe explain what it had to do and how complex it was. So how this applies, all of these apply to your experience, and additional key points. And yeah, after hoping that we can continue a conversation with the rest of the panelists from them. Over to you, Chris or Mariella. I don't know who would want to speak first.
Go ahead.
No, I think it would be great, Mariella, if you could touch on the connectivity issues we had with the chatbot. I just wanted to pick up before one question, which was in the chat here about whether it's difficult for NGOs or international development institutions to actually fail fast. And I think there is a big misconception a little bit, because of course, kind of the benefit or the ultimate end use for beneficiaries is our primary target often. But we also must not forget that often innovation can make an NGO or an international development bank more efficient, just as it does with a private company. So for instance, with our drone project with TechnoServe in Benin, we actually want to be more efficient in targeting the right farmers at the right time, making our own farmer training actually more efficient than it has been so far. Because for now, we've been training farmers and we didn't really know how many trees did they own, what are the problems they're facing in the field. but by actually applying new types of technologies, we have much more insights into the practices they apply and actually be more efficient in our own work. And I think that already merits kind of at least trying to be creative and innovative and trying out different and new approaches to your work that you're doing in your daily job.
Okay, cool. So in terms of connectivity, that was indeed an issue when we worked on the chatbot. So, and this is actually what I would talk about when we profiled our user group at the beginning. In our case, farmers as well. In some cases, they were not able to get to receive mobile data or data connectivity when they were in the field. And also, that's been another question in the chat. The user group may not be literate, actually. So it may not be the user group or the end user that you actually reach with your solution. So in our case, for the connectivity, what we realized is that we would need SMS. So the chatbot today, and that was actually quite a technical hurdle, but we found solutions that we could combine in such a way that we can actually stream the chatbot both via WhatsApp and also via SMS, to be able to extend our reach to those areas that do have network but not not data connectivity. In terms of literacy, so that is why why our chatbot the user group of our chatbot is actually extension workers instead of farmers. And here I would encourage to to use the second best, so to speak. So for example, when you actually want to reach the farmers and you cannot because, for example, they're illiterate, you can think of the second best option. In our case, it was the extension workers that would be the main point of contact for farmer groups. Or even, we know that we would not have to reach each and every single extension worker, because from the user profiling we did at the beginning, we knew that there was quite a bit of exchange in between those extension workers and also with the farmers. So we can trust that information we spread via the chatbot then further spreads to the actual end user we were trying to reach. And the last point I would like to pick up on, that was a point raised by Mark, that's the sustainability of ownership. I think that's something super important, because we tend to design our interventions for a project period, and then we tend to forget about what happens with our intervention and the tools we set up after we leave, right? So who's going to take this solution further? And this is something that we pay particular attention actually in the remote sensing project that Chris has talked us through. How do you make sure, or we do really make sure that that we localize the solution in such a way that however you interact with the tool is such that users can really understand and can take and use this further even when the project has ended.
Thanks, Mariella and Chris. That's really interesting. So I really like both of your points. About how first the idea that it makes you more efficient. I think that's one point that we also share with the idea of digitalizing government policies. Agricultural policies, and being able to better target, which has a really strong point on equity. And your point, Mariella, on the key stakeholders that might not be the first one you will think about, or not your direct target, but you need to be creative into understanding who's the best entry point for spreading the adoption. And of course, sustainability of ownership. I don't know if Mark or Nazar would like to build on maybe on some of the points. Mark, I think you suggested to share with us some more examples of some innovation you knew about or had worked with. Mark, over to you.
Agnes, Nazar is leaving in 20 minutes, so can you bring him in first and then Mark?
Okay, so Nazar will bring you first then.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to share. And just to say, for me, the key to echo what Mariella was saying, there are two elements, right? First of all, are you understanding your target audience correctly? Do you really know what matters? Can they speak or not? Like immersing yourself and getting there on board, like, is it possible or not? That I think is one of the key questions. The second one, we talked about end-to-end ownership before, and we're coming back to that. I think the paradigm, you know, our thinking needs to shift from project-based efforts to a goal-based effort. You know, till we didn't achieve our goal or ambition, we do not disengage, or we do not fully disengage. And I mean, doesn't matter which specific project I take from any company I worked for. I think that's the biggest issue when you talk about innovation. You know, like, there are passionate people who worked on the inception of the idea, who bring it to the prototype phase, who bring it to the minimum viable product phase. But very often then we need to hand it over, be it from the central team to the markets who will have to implement it, be it from, you know, a project team to an implementation team, doesn't matter. But then those people, if not involved early on, first of all, they might have this syndrome, not invented here, and therefore there will be a natural rejection. Second, they might not have the same level of knowledge and capabilities just to take it and implement. Third, they might have completely different set of focus areas that they're judged upon, so that your project is not the priority. And therefore, the different bits and pieces and entities are not working in the full synchronization. And I'm a strong advocate, you know, if we talk about innovation, to have a separate teams of end-to-end accountability, having a different set of KPIs to evaluate them against. And then we need not to forget about, you know, the economic outcome of any innovation. That should be profitable or bring value at certain point of the value chain that we're looking at. And therefore, you know, if that's not viable, or if it's not solving a major human issue or business issue, then let's just abandon it early on. And this is another thing that we need to consider, because innovation by design has different rules of the game. You know, if I take an innovation on the core capabilities, let's say launching a new coffee or a new chocolate bar, that's much easier than launching a new business model. Because on one thing, or a new cream or a new mascara, you know, that, like, companies know how to do it. That's their bread and butter for more than 100 years. However, if you tell them to become a new Amazon or a new Google, they don't have experience in doing that. And even if talking about Amazon and Google or Facebook, they had one big success, but then very often their growth strategy is through merger and acquisitions. You know, Facebook bought Instagram, Google bought YouTube. So, and those big companies or big innovations that they bought were not developed internally. So you can see a natural squaring to buying successful MVPs and or already scaled MVPs, rather than develop them internally, because it's very hard to reproduce such a success. So to sum up, I think we're going back to the same issues. How do we make sure, when we are constructing a complex watch mechanism, that we're having all the needed elements, and we're plugging them, or we're putting them in place in the right moment of time with the right expertise? And very often you would know that a complex watch is assembled by one person from the beginning to an end. You know, it's very important to have this one expert making sure it all flows. So these are the key questions I truly, you know, am facing in whatever experience I had before. And I would bring am bringing another dimension of this core business or core capabilities versus non-core, because that's also very important. If you're just doing a new incremental innovation, that's much easier than going into completely new sphere. And, you know, the business metrics would be different. What's the payback time? What's the investment needed? You might not have a needed factory for this. You might not have, you know, and I can go on and on. So this is where it's very important to try to imagine things up front, but as we said, it's almost impossible. So you need to be mentally ready to iterate and adapt your idea with a strong support from top management, or, you know, politicians in case of some of your organizations, but basically the key stakeholders who are supporting it with money and people resources to make it happen.
Thank you very much, Nazar. That was very, very interesting point. Maybe I would like, maybe Mark can jump in and go on the different elements we just been talking about.
Yeah, I wanted to respond a little bit to your question of what is the role of the bank in all of this. How can the bank, through its mandate, through its the way it does business, the way it funds innovation and scaling trajectories. How can it support some of these things that we all know are good, like having diversity in your network, learning, failure, asking for feedback, exposing yourself, but that everybody or many people or many projects, interventions seem to somehow ignore or push to the back once we start actually working, because they complicate our life. But then again, you know, change and innovation is not something easy, otherwise it would probably happen more. I think one of the things that we have been working on is a concept of agricultural innovation systems. And agricultural innovation systems is basically all of the actors, all of the processes, structures, investments that are geared towards generating innovation. And this can be as part of a national system of agricultural research, extension, service provision. This can be part of you know, a more global system, and etc. So where you draw the boundaries is a little bit artificial. But I think the World Bank has a huge role and responsibility to support national governments in developing their agricultural innovation systems, in improving their agricultural innovation systems, in closing some of the gaps between research and development. I think that's in many countries, these two entities, whether it's within governments or whether it's in public institutes or private institutes, those are not really bridged, those gaps. So the science doesn't get feedback from the practice, and the practice doesn't get access or is not involved as much as should be in innovation and technology development and testing. So I think that is where the World Bank has a very important role to play. And those kinds of investments, I think, also align very well with what the bank invests in. It can be infrastructural, and can be not only just the physical infrastructure, but also knowledge infrastructure, partnerships, sharing, knowledge sharing, and etc. So I think those kinds of structural investments in developing capacity for innovation and scaling is much more useful than investing in specific innovation, whether it's the use of drone or artificial intelligence. Like many of the speakers have said, the type of innovations that we will use or aspire to use to overcome some of the development challenges that we face, those will change over time. It is more the capacity in a system of people and organizations to identify what are the problems, what kind of innovations are suitable, how can we localize them, how can we scale them, and then the next problem will be there. It's never going to end. So I think this capacity of identifying and overcoming problems or bottlenecks, that is where World Bank can really, with its mandate, make a real contribution. I think also funding failure, as we sometimes say. So I think there are not a lot of investors in the agricultural sector that really put funding failure on their banners and on their in their slogans. I also have to make a note there that you should fund failure as well as success. Of course, it's not all about failure, but I think the percentage of failure that an organization is willing to report on is probably quite a good indicator of the percentage of success that you will have in your organization or in your system. And I think the latter is also on the agenda. So the funding failure, and we want to see more failure of many of the large development donors, such as the Gates Foundation, many of the governments that invest in agricultural research and development. They are actually asking, they're starting to ask questions like, what is your fail rate? And if organizations don't really have a clear example or a clear answer to such a question, I think it doesn't really contribute to the credibility of those organizations or consortia or what have you. So I think funding failure as well as success, structural investment in agricultural innovation systems is definitely something that the World Bank could play a leading role in.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I think that maybe what we're saying here is that we need to use another word than failure, because ultimately, if we think about constant iteration towards a goal and success, there's not necessarily failure, but just a delay in finding the right solution for solving some problems. So maybe somehow we shouldn't talk too much about failure so much and start talking about the involvement all the time to solve the problem. Parmesh, I'm conscious of time, so maybe we should move on to our Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Mary Agnes. It was a very rich discussion already, and I think I like because Mark already started including some of the responses that are coming from the chat, and as well, I think Chris and others also did that. So I will now take some issues from the audience, because the audience has been very patient. This is the problem in the virtual kind of webinars, is that people should feel that the points they're raising are being responded. So I'll quickly go through a set of 3 cluster of questions and then ask all the panelists to respond to that at this stage. So something which I think people are asking is, how do we develop now evaluation and evidence and measurement with this new kind of iterate, fail, learn kind of a model? How do you learn, and what is the evaluation framework? Because we need to replace our existing ways of measuring things with something else. So if there are any pointers in that direction, the way you have evaluated and the way you have measured the impact of what you are doing will be very useful. The second thing I think is about how do you invest in an innovation system as opposed to a project? System means that failure is inbuilt into it. And the final question is about patient capital versus venture capital. Because it's like this has been talked about for a lot of time in development, the word patient capital. In fact, patient capital means that you are allowing people to fail, and you are allowing people to go through 1 or 2 cycles of innovation, failure, learning there. So why are not many models of patient capital still evolving? I think foundations are doing that. Now, also the final point about that, we are a membership organization, the World Bank, of governments. Governments don't like, we are asked every time we raise resources from IDA, our concessional arm, we are asked for results. And, if we are being asked for results every 4 years for mobilizing next round of financing, and the way we are reporting is very different. And so how do we provide space in all our shareholders, particularly who are giving us resources, which are coming from even the OECD and other countries, to really provide space for that? What would be the way that we change the metrics of how we evaluate our performance in large-scale funding and other kinds of things there? And how do we communicate this to the government? There's also another set of issues which are there. And finally, I think it is about that our clients are governments, and we are helping governments innovate and create that innovation system. So if you were giving an elevator pitch to a Minister of Finance and Minister of Agriculture, who is always struggling with allocating resources for agriculture and food, how will you make that pitch to that minister or what? So I think there's a set of questions, and I think Mark, if you want to go first, it will be good for you to go there. Yeah. Then we'll go to Chris, and we go to Nazar since he has to leave. Then we go to Chris and Mariella. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Well, the pitch is simple, although I cannot backstop it with numbers. But I think the pitch is that investment in agriculture innovation or in innovation systems, they have a very high return on investment, but you won't see them next year. That's the thing. And in politics, of course, you have to keep your voters happy. You have to keep the people happy. And these kinds of investments, they take maybe 10, 15, 20 years of return time. And I think, well, one of the things I think is that we have to be realistic about that. So I also see in the sector that there's a lot of selling of dreams. We can go from a good idea to reaching 2 million farmers in 3 years. You know, that it doesn't work like that. As I said before, innovation and scaling, they are long trajectories of learning, trial and error. Sometimes your momentum may be gone completely. Sometimes it can come back because of all kinds of triggers in a system that you have zero control over. COVID, I think, is a very good idea. I think it has incentivized a lot the digital extension and investments in digital extension. So people have been working on that for years, but because of an externality, all of a sudden it may create the right momentum for innovation and the use of innovations at scale. I think I also wanted to respond a little bit to the issue of innovation system changes versus short projects, and also you know, how do we report on that? I think in the organization where I operate, in many of the programs we use theory of change approach. And theory of change, basically, you can use at different levels. So you can say, where do we want to be 15 years from now with the cassava sector in Rwanda? 15 years, of course, is a long time. You cannot ask donors and investors to commit for a 15-year change process. But then you try to cut up your theory of change and say, like, okay, so what are the current bottlenecks that we first have to tackle before we can start thinking about maybe inviting private sector, doing processing, and etc. So you start and to think about, like, what kind of innovations do we need? What is already out there? What are the bottlenecks for using these kinds of innovation? It can be new cassava varieties. It can be agronomic practices. It can be access to market or access to finance issues, pest and disease management, etc. And once you've tackled some of these projects, some of these bottlenecks in maybe some short-term projects, so that's where the projects come in, then maybe, and you can show that you actually tackle them, then you start doing another round of problem identification, prioritization, and trying to tackle them again. So I think in that way, you try to kill two birds with one stone, where you have a long-term vision and your long-term theory of change, but within that, you have shorter cycles of action, reflection, learning, and adaptation that allow you, first of all, to work concretely on specific bottlenecks, but also to use some principles of adaptive management, reflective learning, to respond to the change in the environment that we don't have a lot of control over. And I think for if you can, as an organization, if you can show that you are constantly identifying bottlenecks, trying to tackle them, and reassess the new situation, you know, that is probably as far as you could claim your contribution to impact or to bigger goals, as long as it's somehow packed or nested in this long-term theory of change, where you express your vision of success and how your actions or how your investments are to contribute to sustainable development goals or other kinds of impact objectives. So I think we have to be a little bit modest about what we can achieve with our contribution. It's more about, like, increasing the performance of our projects, of our programs, of our organization and innovation system, rather than that you could easily say, like, okay, give us $2 million and we'll solve the big bottlenecks in the cassava value chain for the next 15 years. It usually doesn't work like that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Really appreciate your perspectives and a lot of thought there. And I'll now ask Nazar to bring his perspective on the questions which have been raised. Nazar, over to you.
Thanks, Parmesh. I mean, I won't cover them all because, as you said, I have to run, but 2 sentences. I think for the organization like World Bank, it's very important to have a closer cooperation with big corporations and listen to what are their needs, because when you invest into innovation, you know, this synergy with the sector can be beneficial both for startups, you and corporations, because then, you know, we're aligned towards common goal. And normally, if I look at the biggest innovation of last decade, it didn't come neither from NGO sector nor from, you know, political institutions. It came from the business side, and it's not bad. For example, we talked about venture capitalists. They're looking only at biggest bets. Yes, they're placing their money everywhere, but for the new rounds of financement, they're supporting only the most promising ones. And it's not a bad attitude, right? It requires certain courage and gut to say, okay, these 5 or 10 have much lower chances to succeed than these 1 or 2, and we tried them all, we support them all to a certain stage, but we go on only with 1, 2 biggest. And very often, if you listen to venture capitalists, they're saying we don't look at the idea as such, we look at the team, at the people who are there. And that brings me to the second point when you said, how do we pitch to a finance director? I think it's very important to have somebody credible to pitch to the finance minister, a serial entrepreneur with a good name and success record. Because if that's a person, he or she who already landed 3 or 4 things, who already operated with big budgets and managed big teams with success, it's much more credible than somebody with 0 experience, but with a great idea, pitching for millions of dollars. So therefore, I mean, obviously we need also a right person as a finance minister, who is rather open-minded, open to these type of experiments, but it's about trusting each other, building trust. And very often trust is built if you can show that your theory can be proved in practice. And therefore, that's for me kind of certain elements of the success formula. So happy to follow up in any form, email or any other conversation. Thanks for having me today, and sorry I have to jump out at this point of time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Nazar. Thanks for your perspective. Unfortunately, you don't have that much power to choose our finance ministers at this stage. And so I think we are trying to see, but clearly corporate innovation is a very important part of what we are trying to foster, particularly in the digital technology side. So we are working with a lot of large agribusiness companies now, and also through Plug and Play, which is an accelerator, which brings corporate innovators, startups, and governments and the World Bank coming together. We're just launching one initiative in South Africa in the same way, where large companies, startups, and others will come, and we will foster some kind of an innovation platform, the kind of which you are talking about. So we will be in touch with you. Thank you, Nazar. Over to Christoph. And can you now respond to the set of questions? Your presentation has sparked a very interesting conversation, and I would also like you to reflect on when you are part of TechnoServe now, and you are really doing it on this kind of things in many countries, and you're representing TechnoServe also now. How is TechnoServe promoting this kind of development model, which allows iteration, failure to do, because TechnoServe also has to raise resources almost every year, and it has to go for the appeals and all that. So how are you able to create awareness among the people who are supporting you on this kind of a model of development? So could you take that, and plus any other question you want to take? I'm not just forcing you to answer this question only, but anything else you want to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, I'll just jump to your question right away, which is we got actually, also in TechnoServe is a process, and we're internally also trying to, advance kind of the innovation agenda. But we got really lucky with actually the Belgian government through WeHubit, their kind of venture branch of Annabelle, their development agency, supporting us. And in a project, we were able to show first kind of results, and that really pushed us to have something in our hands to show other donors what we're actually able to do. So I think it takes a bit of an example, or to show and prove, at least in a small scale, that you're capable of doing these kinds of projects to actually unlock larger funding opportunities. And then I think there was also a question on kind of scaling technologies in Benin, and this kind of investment system, and kind of what the elevator pitch would be. And I think often, you said sometimes ministers, I think Mark said it, sometimes ministers or governments are too bold in saying, in a couple of years, we want to transform our sector. And especially, in Benin, for instance, that's exactly where we jump in, right? There is an ambitious plan of doubling cashew production and tripling cashew processing, and it's just not possible with traditional means. But it opens up at the same time a space where you can say, well, okay, you have an ambitious plan, and to kind of achieve it, we need to try out new approaches and new ideas, and that's kind of where our initiatives and projects come in, because how do you grow the cashew sector massively is by trying to be more efficient in your work, identifying cashew farmers that you want to train. And that's kind of almost a logical step of, okay, we can't do that traditionally. We need drones. We need something, from a bird's eye view to actually identify all these cashew farmers we want to reach. And so I think the elevated pitch was almost the other way around, from the government, like, how can we do that? And then respond to these kind of ambitious plans. And I think what Benin is doing very smartly is they have this systemic approach, right? They don't just want to grow kind of the cashew production, but they also want to grow processing and kind of market access. So it's a very well-knit initiative, both on kind of a few steps of the supply chain or the value chain that they want to grow in parallel. And I think that's, again, very important to kind of create this system, this entrepreneurial ecosystem where you can try out things.
Thanks a lot, Lucas. Very appreciate it. And so we will come back to you. I think we need a good discussion with our World Bank Benin team and you guys to see how we can work together on this. So I think clearly there's a lot of synergy there. Mariella, over to you.
Yeah, I think the last point, I'm aware of time, I would like to iterate, and that I, for example, would put into that elevator pitch, is an efficient knowledge transfer system. So failure, yes, but making sure that you document what you learn and then being able to transfer these learnings beyond your project, beyond the country that you work in, to other projects. So I'm making this very pragmatic. For example, what we have at TechnoServe is, for the chatbot, for example, we have a 2-pager on how to build a chatbot. What are the learnings we took from that first chatbot, and what do you need to watch out for? Whether it's users being wary of the costs that, this chatbot, which it doesn't, but might occur to them. These kind of things, which could actually lead to impediments of adoption. These kind of things you can document and you can share, whether it's internal webinars or just through 2-pagers or whatever. And in terms of KPIs, how do you track, right? When you can't deliver money terms in those 2 first years or so? In the startup world, it's always traction, whether it's transactions or other types of traction, right? So why don't we try to take the approach and say, traction in our projects could be user engagement. And what does engagement mean? Well, first of all, probably in the chatbot example, that they have conversations, that actually something takes place. That's already some sort of traction, but that doesn't measure yet whether they're adopting the training that you want to convey to them. But then potentially, and that's further down the route, you will be able to measure whether they adopt it or not by measuring what their output is, right? Did they adopt farmer practices, and does this lead to more production, or these kind of things? So I think there is creative ways of both transferring knowledge beyond projects, and also tracking or showing that you make progress.
Thank you, Mariella. That's very, very important. I personally feel that the chatbots on all the commodities in Africa itself, we were systematically looking at it, could be very transformative itself. So if I had power and resources, I would invest in a chatbot-oriented solution across geographies, across commodities, and learning these generic lessons which you are learning on how to do this well, And I think we need to definitely talk with TechnoServe and our West Africa team to see how we can collaborate on that, because there's a lot of potential for us to collaborate. I would now, because we are losing people now, so I just don't want to lose everyone before we close. I really want to thank everyone, Christoph, Mariella, Mark, Nazar, Mary Agnes, for a very stimulating discussion. So we are getting into this space of supporting this kind of innovation as we go forward. And I think we need to become much more smarter in how to invest in this ecosystem. And I think there are a lot of ideas which were thrown today, which is very important. Spend more time in the beginning in learning from end users, develop a more virtuous cycle of trying things, learning, and then rebuilding again, rather than going for the first thing which comes past your door. Generally, because our horizons are like that, we tend to fund things which are already looking like winners. And that's why we are not able to build the ecosystem. Ecosystem can only be built if failure is also considered a part of investment. I tried doing this in bank projects. We have an implementation completion report. When I did one report in 2004, I also gave 16 examples of where we failed. But that's not enough. In the bank, you have to say, if you failed, what did you do? And how did you convert those failures eventually into some kind of learning and success? So I would say that an institution like the bank, which is a bank, we need that money back as well. So we need to sort of develop a kind of a different cycle by which we can report on these things and then learn from it and then report success there. So it has to be a different thing, but it's not that difficult. People said that in the bank, if you write that you committed a mistake, you can be fired. It doesn't happen. We all commit mistakes all the time. It's not like that. As if someone says in the bank they never committed any failure and we just achieved all these successes without any failure, it's a utopia. So I think it's a very important thing which we need to build on. But also this thing about end-to-end innovation systems, developing a good definition of scale, including customization, adaptation, building more human-centered design approaches in the beginning, where we spend a little bit of time talking to end users and also getting feedback regularly from the end users. And also, I think the questions about we should do these in the context with all the players in the system, whether it's corporate, whether it's startups and others. So I really would like to thank all the audience for actively participating as well. And we would look forward to building this partnership with all the panelists today, so that we can use this practically to do that. And we have a lot of work going on this scaling up issue outside the bank also, which I think Mark and Julie alluded to. So I would request our own teams to join these networks also, because these days we are learning a lot. I think our virtual learning coefficient in the bank has quadrupled during the COVID crisis. So I think this is a very important part. And I think once it gets into the DNA that you have to learn, then it becomes integral. You can't sleep without learning during a day. And so I think I would urge all our teams to really interact with the panelists individually and approach them, and then see whether we can develop something collaborative. And so please look for this next announcement in this series. And please go to the Open Learning Campus website to look at all the other webinars and then future ones which are going to come there. And thank you, everyone. And thanks again to everyone for participating very actively. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.